Let me say how delighted I am that you were able to come this evening as we celebrate this Eucharist on this special day of prayer for the legal protection of unborn children, and as we celebrate in the liturgy of today, a time to give thanks for the very gift of life that God has given to us as well. We are so very much aware that church teaching is very clear about the value of every human life, from conception through natural death. And it is very clear in our society, too, that our society does not view things in that same light, and that human life is not particularly valued, whether it be from conception or whether it be in the elderly years as people grow older and do not seem to be able to make what we regard in a society as a contribution, if you will, rather than simply the contribution of the life that God has given. The scriptures today, in particular from the prophet Isaiah, remind us, before birth, the Lord called us. From our mother's womb, he gave us our name. And it's so important for us to recognize that too, because, as you know, we can sometimes be inclined to forget that, and certainly our society disregards that. One of my earliest memories as a young priest was going to visit a very old lady who was dying. And before I went there, and her family gathered around, and we gathered around her bed, and we had a nice visit and a nice conversation. And then finally she said to me, she said, you know, I want the rest of them to leave because I want to talk to you, Father, about something. And she was in her late 80s, I think. And one of the things that she wanted to talk to me about was the fact that as a young girl, about 16 or 17 years old, she had had an abortion. And it had weighed heavily on her soul and on her heart her whole life. And simply, I know she had gone to confession, she had done all the things that she should do, but it was always there for her. And then she told me some other things, just things about her family, how much she cared for them. And I can assure you that when, after she died and at the funeral, they were all very curious about what she had said to me. The only thing I told them was how grateful she was to them for the care they had extended. I obviously did not tell her, but I think it struck me so very much, and I've never forgotten that experience with this old lady who, after many years of life, was still dealing with that issue in her life. And so sometimes I think we can forget that there are scars in people's lives who have had abortions that somehow we need to work to provide healing for. We need to work for the protection of children, of the unborn children. And quite frankly, while it is an issue that we try to deal with in our society and in our legislatures and so on, ultimately for us, while it matters what happens in those circles, our view of the gift of human life does not change. And no matter what our laws may provide for, that may be legal and all of those kinds of things, that doesn't change the fact that in our eyes, every human life, from conception to natural death, has great value. And so I think it's important for us, as we live out our own lives, to stand up for every aspect of human life. We stand up for the child in the womb who has not been born. We stand up for those who are poor and the marginalized. We stand up for those who are elderly. We stand up for those who are refugees. We stand up for everyone who is a gift of God and who has been made in the image and the likeness of God himself. And I think it's so important for us to recognize that all of us and every human life is a reflection of the very life of God himself. And so it represents some significant challenges, I think, for us as well. And it means that we certainly need to be working for the legal protection of unborn children. But there's a bigger issue out there in addition to that. That's not to say that that is an unimportant issue, but it is to say that there are many issues out there, and we cannot forget them all, especially as we come to give thanks this night for the gift of life and as we pray for the protection of unborn children. A number of years ago, Cardinal Bernardine spoke about the seamless garment of human life, and he was highly criticized for that, for seemingly to minimize, if you will, the attention that needs to be given to the issue of unborn children and so on. And yet it's rather interesting in our own day, our Holy Father speaks to us of that same reality about how all of human life is important to us. And in a sense, he seems to be repeating that seamless garment notion, how you cannot take one from the other, and how important it is that we recognize that from everything that we know. We are told that we are the servants of the Lord from the time of our conception, and that God will show us his glory. I think it's important for us sometimes as we reflect even on the issue of abortion and the tragedy that it is in our society, not for us to just decry the reality that is there, not just for us to be highly critical and condemning of those who support it, but I think we have to ask ourselves as believing people, what are we doing as a church to support people, and what alternatives are we able to offer people as well? What do we say as a church to the young woman who is pregnant outside of marriage and who does not know what to do and feels abandoned and left beside? What kind of support do we provide? And it seems to me that that's one of the challenges that we face sometimes as we live out our lives within the church. We can be very clear about what our teaching is, what we believe, and what we think everybody else ought to do. But sometimes we have a harder time, if you will, determining what it is that we can do to support human life in all its forms, from the unborn child in the womb, the mother who is expecting that child, what we can do for those who struggle in so many areas of human life. And so this day that we come together today is a day of prayer when we ask the forgiveness for our society of the tragedy of abortion that has impacted the lives of so many unborn children. We also come, though, today to give thanks for the gift of life that he has given to each one of us. And we have come to know, as the scriptures teach us, that the Lord has spoken and he has formed us as his servant from the womb itself. And so today I would just invite you, as we gather here in this cathedral, to be so mindful of the lives that have been lost, the tragedies of human suffering that have taken place because of the reality of abortion, and the need that we have to value human life in all its form, and to ask ourselves the question, what do we do? What do we do as a church to provide that support for those who look for alternatives to abortion? And I think that's one of the real challenges that we are faced with as we go about our lives. And we can sometimes be inclined to say, well, that's somebody else's problem, but it really is ours. Because if we truly believe what we say we believe, then there's a responsibility that goes with that to provide an alternative for people, whatever that may be. And I know we have our Catholic Family Services, and dioceses have Catholic Charities to assist with that. I know that there are various pregnancy centers in various parts of the state where people are assisted in providing alternatives. And the question is, how can we be supportive for them, and how can we support human life in all its forms? So today we come to seek forgiveness for our society, for the disregard for human life. We come to give thanks for the blessing that God has given to each one of us in human life, and we come to be challenged, if you will, by what we believe, to put into practice what we say we believe as we care for and we search out others and how we might help. And so, in this way, each one of us can proclaim the glory of God, each one of us can show forth the value of human life, and each one of us can know that we have done our part in prayer, in action, to value human life wherever it may be found. It implies that it affects the way that we treat one another, the way we care for one another, and it affects every aspect of our life. But for this gift of life that God has given to us, today we give thanks and we give praise to our God for having called us to life, having given us a mission to proclaim the value of life. And for this we give thanks as we prepare to offer this Eucharist.